So hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so glad to meet all of you. And I've certainly heard of this meetup group. And you'll see from my presentation why really this is a wonderful place for me to talk about my research. I'll start with, someone might have to grab me off the stage if I spend a bit too long up here. Let me know if it's going past time. Okay. So the research I'm going to talk about today really spans two books, Writing Futures and my book on augmentation technology. And I thought I would just quickly give you a background on how I landed up doing this research. So I did my own PhD at the University of Waterloo on the future of technology, a technology future when we're going to wear tech. And this is close to the turn of the century. People did not believe me that we were going to wear any technology. And my research was welcome. I was welcomed to do my research in the English department. I could propose what the technical future of our tech was going to be, that we're going to wear technology on the body. And I sometimes used all kinds of different research areas. I used advertising, I used marketing. I had my own startup company and sold it in the .com era, and was really quite convinced that we were going to wear technology and it was going to be embodied. We're going to have an embodied tech future. And this is the kind of thing we talk about now as a social imaginary or social tech future. And I think that much more recently, even given the interest in AI and ChatGPT and GPT, people are a lot more interested in imagining what is going to happen in 5, 10, or 30, or even 50 years out. So I'm most comfortable in 50 years, but one thing that's happened to me is all of my research has actually transpired much more quickly than I had expected. So the embodied computing is my central research area, as I said. We released that book right in the middle of the start of the pandemic, the dark days of the pandemic, the summer of 2020. And embodied computing invited engineers like all of you, artists, writers, humanities researchers like myself, to comment on the idea that we're going to carry, wear, implant, and ingest technologies. And that was a lot of fun to open it up to different disciplines, to interdisciplinary research, to hear what, bring technology to different domains in society to begin to sort of voice their opinions about it, rather than only technical fields. Then in 2021, the summer of 2021, a collaborator and I, Anne Hildoon at the University of Minnesota, decided we were going to write a book about writing futures and the idea of writing with AI agents and collaborating with AI agents and non-human actors. And it came out with not many people were very interested in that. We did write about GPT technologies, but most people thought, well, that's far in the future. Those of you might know a little bit about it. OpenAI had only begun to release very early prototypes and examples of this, and they weren't very good. And so the book kind of there was a little bit of interest as sort of a writing future. That's why the book is called that. But then in November of 2022, everything changed. And suddenly the research we had proposed sort of a year earlier became very interesting to people. But we had moved on to the next book by that time, which is what I'll talk a little bit about today, which is augmentation technology and artificial intelligence, which is really the next phase. That in some ways is future tech, right? And the scope of that is still technologies you carry, wear, implant, or ingest, but now with the convergence of AI with all of those technologies. And that is what I'm going to sort of introduce. I'd also like to, my collaborators, I head up an institute called the Digital Life Institute at Ontario Tech University, although we have research partners from the University of Minnesota, Texas Tech, Concordia University, and several other individuals. We have about 31 members now. And our goal is to, have a network of international multidisciplinary scholars talk about the social implications of highly disruptive technologies. I just wanted to, and this is interesting for me. I'm really curious to hear what all of you are going to say in the Q&A. We decided that if we don't involve, interdisciplinary scholars, people from other areas, we can't really deal with the disruption that we're sort of going through now. And I'm not going to talk about all of these, but Digital Life Institute, this is the scope. Agency and agents and space, place, and infrastructure are the scope of the technologies we're interested in. And on the other side are the research clusters of different researchers who are contributing to all sort of tech emergence, early tech emergence. So I'm the research cluster leader for AI and implications, but I collaborate with people who are interested in building digital literacy, which in my view is very much a civic and tech concern, sustainability, equity, and culture, digital cultural heritage, AI and education. Started because GPT technologies and ChatGPT specifically caused such a disruption in education, right, in classes and how students are dealing with all of these issues, and assistive technologies. And just a quick, so for example, over the past 4 months, I've been collaborating with my research cluster and the Building Digital Literacy cluster at University of Minnesota, and AI and education that's headed up by someone at York, in order to deal with what we consider to be civic engagement issues like AI literacy for the public, digital metadata platform literacy, critical digital literacy, which is really challenging corporations to make their tech, let's say, more ethical, and education, instruction, and pedagogy. So that's a bit of the backstory. I don't know how much I'll get to today, but today I wanted to talk about generative AI and its trends, future trends, because that's what I'm interested in, but also the cultural imposition that's such a sort of a radical, let's say, urgent emergence that we're all sort of going through. I use the term adoption when you start to use a technology, and that can happen rapidly, but adaptation or cultural adaptation can take years. So for example, if you think we've had internet technology, 20 years we've been adapting to digital tech or internet technology. It sort of emerged in around the year 2000, and we've had 20 years. Now we're going through much more radical change. So we're going to talk about some controversies and augmentation tech. So how many in this room have used any kind of generative AI or ChatGPT, and maybe online? I don't know if we have Luke, if we can, I don't know. I just want to know. So, okay. So most people have tried it, have investigated, or actually worked in the field, I think.
We had a couple of hands online too, Isabel.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm just going to move this. Okay. So just as a reminder, a generative pre-trained transformer is a type of large language model. It uses machine learning and specifically deep learning to generate text that appears human-like. It's called generative because it can generate new text or new images or new video or new code based on the input they receive. It's pre-trained because they're trained on a large corpus of text data before being fine-tuned for specific tasks. And transformers because they use a transformer-based neural network architecture to produce input text and generate outputs. One of the most of it is deployed through chatbots when it meets the public, right? When the interface is the AI chatbot, and that was a design choice to use that as the human-computer interface that people were going to use. So AI chatbots are programmed to converse with people through written conversations by using question and answer communication model, making them deliberately easy. One can also ask that they generate an image or a video, also called a prompt. And so AI chatbots perform AI writing and other automated tasks. I think prompting is a genre. It's definitely developing a style, an aesthetic. There'll be expertise and engineers in prompting, and I'm already seeing many examples of that. The GPT-4 chatbot was trained on a massive amount of text data, as much as a rumored 100 trillion parameters to help it understand natural language and generate human-like responses. GPT-4 has as much as 10 times the number of parameters as ChatGPT 3.5, making it much, much more powerful. There's so many products now, there's so many third-party companies that are using the technology and developing. I would say these were the first that I started to interact with and use. I use them with my own graduate students at the very start. I teach a course in global AI ethics for computer science masters and PhDs at my university. And that's one of the, I love that course. I love interacting with graduate students in computer science, because I think there's a great deal of, the same as this room, people want to learn how to make technology more ethical. I put this one up because I think as Google is opening up its language model, Palm 2, means that it's going to be available to anyone to use and improve. And this, Palm has the potential to be much more widely adopted than GPT-4. I realize this is also advertising at this point, but GPT-4 and OpenAI only makes it available to a few companies. So this, I think, in some ways is going to be transformative. One of the reasons is the multilingualism. Palm 2 is trained in over 100 languages, including things like idioms, poems, riddles, and it can pass, language proficiency exams. So it claims that it has better reasoning, can handle logic and common sense reasoning, things like that. So this to me, as a sort of human-computer interaction person and a person in communication studies, this one fascinates me and makes me think about the future where will my students be able to interact in one class speaking, 50 different languages on the fly using an embodied technology like an earbud or something you hold? Will we be able to do translation quickly and that kind of thing? But, I can summarize, I think most of us know, why do people like it? It can produce stylistically correct sentences. It can mimic a written conversation. And as a professor, it can help people to write. It can help people to collaborate with others. We get into the controversy. It can complete writing tasks, and it can be used but I think it can be used if it's used systematically. Because it's used systematically through all spheres, I think it will be transformative, AI writing specifically. And I'm putting here will be used for multilingual content translation and creation of written materials. But the part about the adaptation to it and the controversy, I think, is something that's really very important. How is generative AI challenging cultures? How is it harming people and our cultural practices? So in some ways, this is the dystopian argument, right? We argue and bring out the benefits of the technology, but we also have to look at its controversial aspect. Data journalist Katharina Vogt-Holtz explained that ChatGPT gained 1 million users just 5 days after launching in 2022 in November. And we've never been through any kind of transformation like that in terms of digital culture or a digital life experience. Netflix took 3.5 years to bring about this kind of sort of uptake, adoption. And you can see all the other platforms. By January, ChatGPT specifically, the Paco chatbot from OpenAI, estimated to have reached 100 million monthly active users. So again, I don't think we've ever been through such a cultural transformation in terms of the digital culture. I love this image from the New York Times. It was an article by Katie Metz. And I like it because for me, it's a metaphor for how people, embody, these are obviously, it's a metaphor, but AI actors surrounding individual subjects, and in some ways challenging people in their own lived reality. Right? This is, who do I trust? How do I trust the sources that I'm using? Changes how we interact with our own spheres, our own domain. The quote I like: even if researchers train these systems solely on peer-reviewed scientific literature, they might still make statements that were scientifically ridiculous. I think a philosopher, the Italian philosopher Luciano Floridi, in 2013 started to write about autonomy and agents. Virginia Dignam wrote a book called Responsible AI, and she defines autonomy as the capacity of an agent to act independently, to make its own free choices. And she goes on to explain that autonomy is both seen as a synonym for intelligence, as well as that characteristic that people are most concerned about. That's a challenge culturally for people to understand. How do you deal with an agent that appears to act autonomously, make choices for you without your input at times? The other challenge is, and this is common in the public sphere, large language models so hallucinate or confabulate. It's the context. It refers to the mistakes in generated text and that are semantically or syntactically plausible or correct, but are in fact nonsense or incorrect. And this is disturbing to people in the public sphere or anyone who doesn't understand the technology. The other one lately I'm following is the generation of big data sets, to me, which is just as bad or worse, right? Data sets that appear to be legitimate but aren't. And I think it's important to talk about harm. So this is a quote from a researcher from Stanford, Timnit Gebru, who's noted, and she's written some famous papers in this area, that this isn't, she's talking about data harm, but she's talking about the harm in the training sets. When fake news, hate speech, and even death threats aren't moderated out, they are then scraped as training data to build the next generation of LLMs, and those models parrot back what they're trained on, and they end up regurgitating toxic linguistic patterns in the internet. This was written about, a journalist called Karen Hayo wrote about this, and she wrote a series on it. So she is another interesting, she's translating knowledge for the public about harm and how generative AI can be harmful. This one is one I've been working on very recently and doing a discourse analysis on, I'm using traditional news sources, The Economist, the Globe, and just charting the hype, right? How AI is hyped so much attached to specific events. So I'm just curious, did anyone else hear about in June of 2022 when people started to talk about AI being sentient and the Google case, the Google engineer? Yeah, and in my view, this is when AI, the hype attached to GPT started, right? That this, in some ways, was shocking that an engineer started to think that AI had become sentient. And then tracking the timeline, in November 2022, ChatGPT is released, but then there are a series of events, media events that changed how the public begins to understand and adapt to the technology. So Elon Musk, and there are themes here: fear over the loss of human civilization that happens, and also the danger of AI. And I was at the Monk debate last week with Jan LeCun, who is arguing, that we shouldn't be afraid of these things. That we shouldn't be afraid of existential risk of AI. On the other side, researchers are arguing for it, that we need the moratorium. And for me, the interesting thing here is about how this affects our adoption and adaptation to the technology. And so here is a summary of some of the main concerns for generative AI. And I won't go over them because I've kind of spoken to them. 5 minutes? Okay. And so to me, part of this is this crisis of distrust, crisis of ethos over the concept of a trustworthy AI. So experts and inventors and CEOs don't, in those examples I showed you, don't trust in some ways their own product, which is shocking to people, to the public. Strategically, these activities are likely to further corporate tactics and competitive advantage. And it makes us harder for us to wade through how to make the technology ethical and benefit to society, in my view, when the news is pulling public opinion in these two directions. And as I'm saying, there's a lack of regard for technology domains such as education, healthcare, and arts. So interesting to this group, I think we had a whole portion of that book about civic engagement, about this kind of meetup, hearing from people who are interested in the tech and what we can do with it. And I'm curious, maybe in the Q&A we can look at some of these questions that we brought up in that book. Things like how might AI help to recognize, ameliorate, and address some of these challenges that we have? Those kinds of things. How can we use the technology for betterment? So I wanted to just briefly introduce the current book, or the book that we just released in June. My collaborator Anne Hildoon and I, Augmentation Technologies and Artificial Intelligence in Technical Communication. So it's geared to tech writers who are tasked with translating very difficult concepts for people in their own companies, or for the general public, or for students. And to me, that was sort of interesting that they're the ones who are going to have to explain this ethically. I'm just going to read briefly from some of my notes. So we started to notice that the hype around human augmentation was starting to happen outside of, say, military or sort of extreme sports spheres. There's always been human augmentation technologies, like we've had that tech for a long time, but it's now we sort of saw a shift in the rhetoric, a shift in the hype towards everyday people, right? That some people might call it a transhumanist rhetoric or superhuman rhetoric, but that everyday people are going to adopt it. And we know we're starting to watch a Gartner group talk about this on their hype cycle and their reporting. So in brief, augmentation technologies enhance human capabilities or productivity by adding to a body or an ambient environment around a body and providing cognitive, physical, sensory, or emotional enhancements. Those are written as if they're separate, but they're absolutely intermeshed. That you can't separate them, but we emphasize one over the other at certain times. They're as I said, augmentation technologies are undergoing a process of normalization geared to all of us, to society, in various roles: practitioners, caregivers, educators, students. And the discourse justifying augmentation technologies, in my view, uses manipulative language to deliver, to promise this future. So as I said at the start of the talk, I'm interested in technology futures, and this is what the book is about. This is part of the structure of how all of this works together: emerging technologies, embodiments, and then augmentation, which is the core, cognitive, sensory, and physical. And I have examples. We don't have time, we might in the Q&A, of a specific, this is an MIT example where you would use an AI-assisted agent to help you in conversation or in making arguments, writing the whole disinformation on the fly, but it's problematic too. And other sensory enhancements that you can use to. So what I'm getting at is we have ChatGPT or GPT technologies that you use on your desktop, but they're not integrated in any of our worn or wearable technologies yet. And I would say that's the next phase. Emotional enhancement, we hear a lot about this, and a lot of technologies that can read so-called read human emotions. What if that happens on the fly? And physical enhancement technologies. Finally, some of the new technologies that are also being deployed are digital humans, digital employees, digital teachers, which we consider in this sphere of augmentation. So they might be And there are so many problems or issues we need to deal with. Will there be digital teachers? We're already talking about caregivers, robot caregivers all the time. What about other jobs? And we did propose a futures framework, but I'm curious to see how that will play out as people sort of engage our work. So I'm gonna, we always refer to as an ethical framework and in the book, and it's absolutely important to tie this to that kind of, to a principled ethical emergence of tech. I'm just gonna end there, and thank you so much.